Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. In this video, what I want to do is give you a look at a work in progress on a shoreline board set. The customer for this has requested that I create a coastal board set to accommodate some very elaborate, beautifully constructed model ships that he's using, and allow them to be able to be placed in some water nearby, some city village areas, that sort of idea. And as a test, there's some discussion of creating a much larger body of water, but I thought as a good first test would be to create a small inlet that could be then future expanded, modular in design, but would allow me to test out the ability to create a much larger water surface area like this, and to work out small details about amendments that may be included in future boards to facilitate, say, wharves or docks or that sort of idea. What I've discovered in working on this project is that there are definitely a few challenges that I have not experienced before in doing this kind of work, and so I wanted to share some of those challenges with you, as well as some experiments I've been doing about some vegetation that I'd like to include in the water, as many people commented, and including my wife when she first looked at it, with the lily pads that I had done on some recent bodies of water, that it'd be nice to enhance that look by creating some submerged vegetation to complement that and add some real depth to the waterways. So that's something I really want to bring into these boards, in particular because the water is such a dominant feature on them. I really want to add to the illusion of depth and create a much broader sense that this is not a typical pond or a typical waterway. Is it freshwater? Is it saltwater? I'd like to leave that a little ambiguous so that it has some flexibility in how it can be used. But let me take you in a little bit closer and show you some of the things that are adding some challenges to it, as well as the experiments that have been done to date. So first, just a description of the work that's been done to date. Basically, what I've done is I have transitioned the typical verdant, green color scheme here. This is not completed yet; needs a little bit of highlight flocking on it. What I've done is I've transitioned that down into a desert sandy beach color scheme. I've tried to feather that transition throughout to give the illusion of, as the sand starts to mingle with the richer soil, that bleed through is a little more natural looking. I've added in a few rocks, which look a little bit like they're sticking out at the moment, but of course, you have to envision future work where there's going to be vegetation added. The water is going to fill this to some point. So, take it with a grain of salt at this point, but just to explain that. Then what I've done, actually, in here, I'll give you, let's see if I can give you a little closer look. I think that's going to show up pretty well. As I've started painting the waterway, and you may notice the scoring in the surface here. What I've found is that when you pour Envirotex over large surface areas, that the Envirotex can warp over time and deform, I think through difference in temperatures, and it will pull the paint off. It actually bonds to the paint rather than the actual, because that's the surface it's in contact with, and if the paint doesn't have a good bite to the underlying surface, it can actually cause a bubble to form. I've had that happen on several large pieces in the past, and what I've found is that if I score the bottom, this allows the Envirotex and the paint to get a much better bite into the surface, creates more surface area, and you're going to get a resilient bond that isn't going to show that warping over time. This does not show as I'm going to be tinting this water, and as it builds in depth, and when there's future painting done on this will not really show through in the final product, but a little tip actually, and a way to ameliorate the bubbling that can happen with Envirotex. But let's talk about some of the challenges. These two foam sheets exhibit one of the properties that's a challenge when working with foam, in that this board is actually about 1/8 of an inch shorter on this edge than this board here. Now that's not much of a problem in, say, that you could prop this up with a shim, which is my usual recommendation to bring them flush. But the problem can create an issue in the water sections, and this is what I mean by that. So after carving, these boards, this board is actually about 1/8 of an inch shorter than this board for its water connection on this edge. And this board actually has a varying thickness as it traverses the board, and one edge actually is flush with this other board, and then one edge is actually quite a bit shorter. So it's created an unequal height in the water foundation, which is going to make it a challenge when I pour to create an equal level pour between the two pieces and all the subsequent pieces as well. Both of these have an irregular shape, so there's no specific amount of resin I can pour to ensure that the boards are always going to be the same depth, because this is maybe a greater surface area, so it's going to produce a more shallow pour per volume. So what my plan is to do is to use, I'm going to need to create a dam for this pour, as I want to pour this water quite a bit thicker than normal. Well, not that thick, but quite a bit thicker than normal. And in order to keep the Envirotex from leaking off, obviously, I have to create a dam, and I have to border all of these boards. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut hardboard to a specific height, mount it flush. You can't see my hand. Mount it flush to the bottom of these boards, and have on the inside of the hardboard incremental marks working up it, so that I can judge the exact depth of the pour as I'm adding Envirotex, as this will have to be poured in several layers, because and I'll show you why in a second in my experiments, but Envirotex does not like to be poured deeper than, say, at the most, 1/4 inch in one pour, and even then you're probably risking some problems. So I think that by doing that, I can control the fix on this edge by eventually having the water come to an even height between the boards based on using an external guide on the boards. But saying that, one of the other challenges with these boards is that because they're so large and and foam tends to not come, perfectly flat in any case, these boards have quite a bit of warp in them, and because these are so flexible, it's much easier for them to warp. So my plan at the moment is to try to pin them down flat with the hardboard dam that's going to be produced, that's going to be added to the sides, and hopefully that rigidity plus the Envirotex that's going to be laid on it will help to control some of that warping. At least the Envirotex can pour flat for that part, and then I may need to go back in and try to correct the warping at the end of that pour. This is about as shallow as I want to cut on this foam, so because of that warping problem, that's one of the reasons why I use 1.5 inch thick foam, because it gives me a little bit more, body when I start to cut into it. I have been considering 2-inch foam in the future, but all the boards that I've produced to date are 1.5 inch, so I'm going to try to maintain that as much as I can for as long as I can, so that all future work will match those. So here you can see the depth that I've poured it. This is about 1/2 inch thick. I did this in 2 successive pours, and you can see the line coming through here. One of the challenges in pouring it this deep is that you can't really degas the Envirotex before it hardens and no longer allows the bubbles to rise to the surface. So especially in thicker pours, it actually cures faster because it's an exothermic reaction. It generates heat, and that heat will begin to speed up the reaction, and you get a runaway feedback effect. So the thicker the pour, the faster it cures, and so the more likely you are to have bubbles entrapped in it. So clearly that's one reason why I have to pour it in thin sheets, but I wanted to try a thicker pour to see. I also wanted to try to add some vegetation to the water to create an illusion of kelp or seagrass at the bottom, some kind of aquatic plant life, wiggling in the waterway. I first tried some polyfill. Woodland Scenics makes some polyfill. It's a fiber, like a nylon fiber, gauze material, kind of. It's hard to describe, sort of like pillow filling. And I tinted some of that, and I had some trouble gluing it down in place. I was trying to use super glue, didn't work out very well, but I wanted it to have a gossamer feel throughout, and then be able to view it from above and have it look like underwater vegetation. Here you can see some of that effect. Really didn't like this effect overall. Here on the second pour, I used some cotton fibers that I tinted, pulled off a cotton swab, and then swirled them around and then filled them over with the Envirotex. It would look a little different if I added one more layer, which would be the intention, but I just wanted to give me a sense of this, and this looked more like kind of like algae strands rather than plant life, so I decided to try something else. Here, now look at how dark these are. These are over tinted, so it's going to be hard to see some of the things that I want to point out. But before I do that, I did a single pour really deep because I was in a rush and I just wanted to get the raw effect, bubbles, you know, be damned. And what I noticed is under this pour, notice how this tips up right here. This is from the rapid heating of the Envirotex, and it actually causes it to expand. So in the corners here, where it was cooler, it dips down. You can't get a flat pour when you pour this much. So this is about 3/4 of an inch thick, and it's obviously far too much to work with. But that aside, on this one, well, this had a painted bottom. On this one, let's see if I can, oh boy, this might be really hard to see. What I did is I attached some vegetation with hot glue the way I normally would stick it onto the ground in an above water environment, and I tried a whole bunch of different vegetations, and I wish I hadn't tinted this as darkly. I wanted to play with some colors, and because it's such a small amount of Envirotex, a single drop of ink can really shift the color quickly, and obviously you see the result, a little bit too dark. It'd be easier to modulate that in a larger volume of Envirotex. But I really like the effect that this grass is, this sort of plant matter in here is producing, and I think it's something I'm going to pursue along the shoreline. So basically, my intention is to have the water come up, you know, say about almost a half an inch onto the shore, and then use that transition area and out into the water to have grasses that are going to be about 1/4 of an inch or so, you know, attached to the substrate. And then because of subsequent tints of Envirotex, I can create lighter and lighter layers over that so that it will emerge from the murk, you know, and that the tops of the plants will be quite a bit more visible, certainly, than in this experiment, and whereas the bottom will blend into and disappear into the depth, hopefully producing an overall illusion that these are quite a bit deeper than some of the other water features that I've tried. That's the plan at the moment, assuming that straightening the boards with the hardboard goes well, and you know, no other surprises come up, but we'll see how that works out. But anyway, it gives you a sense of the kind of direction I'm interested in taking these boards. And at the end, the plan is to not have excessive waves on it. I'm going to coat it in a very similar way that I've done my other bodies of water, so that you're able to place ships on it without having to try to navigate. You know, it will look artificial if they're sitting on cresting waves. Obviously, that's not going to work. So it needs to be something that's playable as well, and that will also help with the freshwater body option if it wants to be self-contained within a large board set. You know, have 4 of these put together to make a large lake rather than a coastal set on the ocean. So that's the plan at the moment. So it's a new project, some new techniques. We'll see how it goes. If you have any kind of specific suggestions or comments, I'm always happy to hear those, as I've gotten a lot of great ideas from people in the past. Feel free to leave those down in the comment section down below. And if you have any pictures of, if you've seen anything, please don't go out and spend a lot of time looking. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But if you've seen something, especially recently, where somebody's done, you know, underwater vegetation really well for miniatures terrain, I'd love to see a link to that. I've spent a lot of time looking online and trying to find examples that I could mimic or draw inspiration from, and I just haven't seen that much done. So if you know of anything, feel free to pass it along. I'd really be happy to take a look at that. Anyway, stay tuned to the channel. I'll be starting to work on these boards very soon now, in terms of adding in those water layers, and you know I'll come back and show you how the end results have worked out. So thanks for watching, and keep an eye. I'll be back real soon.